Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and it's a pleasure and an honor to open the session. The title is Technology, Power and Truth from the Invention of Writing to AI, and I will start right away with the crisis of life on Earth that industrial civilization has created. That means industrial civilization, has triggered the biggest species extinction for the last 66 million years, when the dinosaurs were almost wiped out. We have in many parts of the world freshwater crisis, aquifers being depleted and so on. We lose about 1% of fertile land due to industrial agriculture and industrialization and so on. And also with oceans and forests, you know much of that. I won't bore you with that. All this has been incorporated into a concept called planetary boundaries by the Stockholm Resilience Center, and they came up with 9 planetary boundaries. We already passed 6 of these boundaries and are about to pass a 7th one. Now, all of this, the crisis of life on Earth, happens without climate change already, and of course, climate change makes things much worse. We are approaching tipping points in the Earth system. The Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact Research came up with this concept of tipping points in the Earth system. Some of them may be reached already in this decade, including Greenland ice, Western Arctic ice shield. The Amazon forest is also very problematic. And if we reach these tipping points, we could also hit a global hitting point for the Earth system, which would mean that the Earth system would flip into a different state called the hothouse Earth, leaving many parts of the world uninhabited. So we're in real trouble. All this happens in a world of... No, I want to go to another point, which is that the Club of Rome 50 years ago came up with the report, The Limits to Growth, which basically said that we keep on business as usual on the growth path. We will, industrial civilization will finish in the 21st century. Now, this report has been revised many times since then, in 2022 as well, and it was shown that the reports and the figures were quite accurate. So if we don't change course, we could see a major drop in population, industrial production, food production in this century. Now, all this happens on a planet with extreme inequality. 10% about the richest men in the world possess as much as half of the world's population, the poorer part of the world's population. And in recent times, we have seen an accelerating panorama of crises, the financial crisis, euro crisis, pandemic, Ukraine war, and so on. And that also has contributed to a major psychological crisis. According to a new study, more than half of young people in the world say that humanity is doomed. So that's a very harsh reality that we are facing, psychological. And that also means that at least in the Western world, the very concept of progress that was so crucial for Western civilization for centuries is about to collapse in slow motion. Ideological coherence is melting, and we see polarization, cultural wars, and so on. And this also contributes to the crisis of the very concept of truth. Whom can we trust? Trust in media and politics is plummeting, as you all know. The crisis of truth, however, predates the AI debate, and I will come back to that later. So we are in trouble, and we are in a transition phase, and nobody knows where all this headed. Now, all of the things I mentioned have a major technological component. The eco-crisis, of course, is caused by fossil fuels, but not only by fossil fuels. It's the extractive model in total, the industrial growth model over development. Many geologists have talked about the Anthropocene, the age of man or humans, but this notion has been challenged by the concept of Capitalocene, which claims that it's not humans as such who have caused this situation, but a certain social organization called capitalism. Now, the social divide as well has a technological component. The rift between those who own technologies and the rest of us is growing all the time. 7 of the 10 richest people I mentioned are tech billionaires, and these tech billionaires have doubled their fortune in the pandemic. So the gap is growing. Also, the crisis of truth is related to technology, media systems, including traditional media, social media, and AI. So we face severe social and technological choices, and we need informed debates. And in order to have a rational debate, we must first of all deconstruct the myth that there's no choice. And a version of that myth goes like that. The development of technology follows a quasi-natural path driven by innocent human curiosity and inventiveness. The one and only direction of that path is called progress. What can be done will be done. Now, what I want to show in this lecture is that technological choices are rather dependent on power structures, property relations, economic and military interests, and of course ideologies. And this also means if we want to change course and avert collapse, we have to change not only this or that technology, but our social systems, including power relations, property relations, key institutions, and mindsets. Now, at any given moment, people invent stuff. We are creative species. The question is, in which inventions are developed further, promoted, and put to large-scale use? And this, of course, is dependent on social systems and power relations, and I will give just a few general examples of this. One is the steam engine. Well, the steam engine has been invented 2,000 years ago by a guy called Hieron of Alexandria. Now, in the social system of those days, it was not very much of any use because it was not a growth society. At the end of the 18th century, with full-fledged capitalism, the situation was quite different. The system already hit limits to growth. There was a shortage in energy, especially wood shortage for smelting in Britain, which was crucial for British military and so on. Prices went up, and they had to come up with a new energy source, which was known for a long time, coal. So it depended on the social structure, whether this technology was used or not. Another example is the transport sector. In the 1920s and 30s, we had two competing concepts of transport. One was public transport, and the other was the car. Now, some car companies like GM and Standard Oil and Firestone and so on bought up rail systems across the US in 45 cities, including New York City and Los Angeles. And what did they do with this? Did they run public transport infrastructures? No, they didn't. They destroyed this infrastructure to build roads and highways. So that's the result of what happened. We see public transport being crushed, and that's the end state of US transport now, and an addiction to fossil fuel infrastructures. And that is also very instructive for our situation today. Now let's come back to information technologies and the question of who owns the truth. Let's go back to 5,000 years ago, where the trouble began. In those days, writing was invented. Now, what was writing used for? Was it used for poetry or rational debate? No, it was first of all used as a logistical tool to organize trade and slavery. We have seen in those days the first city-states, highly militarized, the first class formation in history, societies based on centralized power. And of course, they needed bureaucracies and writing. Now, in the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC, this tool was also used to propagate the ideologies of the upper classes, their view, their thoughts about the universe. And if you have writing, you have more power to propagate their views. However, later on, the 1st millennia BC, writing was also used as a measure of counterpower. For example, by the early prophets who criticized kings, property relations, and the abuse of power. And that means there is a dialectics of technology. It tends to be used in the first place very much by the powers that be, but it could be turned around and used as a counterpower. Now, something similar, I skipped an image. This is the first image of slaves that we have from 3200 BC, when writing was invented. Now, something similar happened with the printing machine in early modernity. What were the most widespread printed text in the 16th and 17th century of early capitalism? Well, it was not text on rational debate. It was major religious propaganda, like, for example, the Hammer of the Witches with about 300,000 copies sold. And what that means is that the question with technology is always who owns the technology, who has the money and infrastructure to use and to control it. I think maybe we could use a different microphone because there's always this kind of feedback. Should we use the other mic? Okay, does it work? Okay, I think it's better, isn't it? Now, things changed dramatically in the 18th century. Printing got much cheaper and widely distributed. An educated middle class and a culture of debate emerged. Printing was used as a counterpower, which contributed to the French Revolution and other revolutions of the 19th century. Now, again, things changed in the 1870s when the rotary printing press was invented. The problem was it was very expensive and only very rich people or corporations could use that technology, and that led to a process of monopolization of the press with the great press moguls of the times like William Hearst emerging. William Hearst was the model for the famous film Citizen Kane by Orson Welles, and in Britain it was Harold Harmsworth. In Germany it was Alfred Hugenberg, who owned half of the German press and contributed massively to the rise of the Nazis. Now, these people had the power to manipulate public opinion in favor of their interests of private capital, and they also spread a quasi-religious propaganda for nationalism to distract workers from the struggle, from the class struggle, and to mobilize for World War I and World War II. Now, around 1920, the system faced a major problem. After centuries of struggle, people in the West had achieved universal and equal suffrage, voting rights for everyone, and that posed a problem because the elites were very much afraid that people would vote out them and the system out of existence. Now, at that time, theories about what was later called a guided democracy emerged. One of the major proponents was Walter Lippmann, the first director of the Council on Foreign Relations, major intellectual, liberal intellectual of the time. He published a book called Public Opinion. And what he said is that humanity is in a way divided into two classes. The upper 20%, let's say, who know how the system works and who are intelligent and knowledgeable, and the other 80%, the bewildered herd, as he called them, who don't know how politics and economics work and who must be guided. And that means public opinion has to be shaped to keep the system running. Edward Bernays, the inventor of public relation, had similar theories in the same time. Now, this was the basis of property relations in the press and this ideology for the mass media in the 20th century. I have to skip a lot of things because there were important challenges to that system in the 20th century: radio and television, the golden age of journalism, the upheavals of the 60s and 70s. But at the end of the 20th century, property relations in the media were about the same as earlier in the century. Now, the internet changed, of course, things dramatically. At the beginning, it was, as you all know, a decentralized structure which challenged established corporate and state media. But then, later on, it was privatized, turned into proprietary products, and today it's dominated by the monopolies of big tech in close collaboration sometimes with governments. And AI, of course, contributes very much to that concentration of power with big tech. Now, when we talk about AI, we first have to talk about the mythology surrounding AI. When we hear about notions like singularity, disruption, and so on, AI will be smarter than humans, we have, first of all, to understand that artificial intelligence, in a way, is a misnomer. Machines neither understand nor think. As the philosopher John Searle once pointed out, rightfully, I think, they are syntactic machines. That means they process science without understanding their meaning. Now, this mythology is used, in fact, by Silicon Valley and others to distract from what is really happening with AI. You will hear a lot about this in this session, I think. Of course, the manipulation of public discourse by opaque algorithms. Although AI doesn't understand anything, it can seriously distort our understanding of reality. Geoffrey Hinton, sometimes called the godfather of AI, said after quitting Google, people will not be able, I quote, people will not be able to know what is true anymore. Now, this is very much empowered by micro-targeting with AI chatbots and so on. This is a new quality of manipulation, especially when people don't know that they are targeted. But we have to face the fact also that the crisis of truth has not started with AI. Just one thing that you all know, the New York Times in 2003 claimed that Iraq was possessing weapons of mass destruction. And this story, this fake news story, contributed to the war with 1 million dead. So it's sometimes also major media which spread fake news. It's not AI only. It's not good, bad AI, whether it's good media, nor the other way around. AI also is, according to Naomi Klein, maybe the biggest theft in human history. It's a gigantic privatization of the work of billions of people and of public knowledge to train proprietary products without consent or permission. AI, of course, is powering surveillance technology. There's lots of military use, drones, autonomous weapons, and so on. But I want to highlight a different aspect that is rarely talked about, and that's the ecological and climate impact. Digital technologies are the fastest growing energy consumer in the world. They have exponential growth with about 6% per year. That means they double their energy consumption in 12 years, a tenfold increase in 40 years. And if we go on like that, it would be the equivalent of today's energy consumption in 58 years. It's clear that we cannot go on that track on a limited planet. Now, Silicon Valley claims that AI will help us to save the climate, make more rational choices, and so on. But indeed, what many of the CEOs of those companies are doing is preparing for the worst. Sam Altman, for example, the CEO of OpenAI, remarked in 2016, I quote, "I have guns, gold, potassium iodide, antibiotics, batteries, water, gas masks from the Israeli Defense Force and a big patch of land in Big Sur I can fly to," unquote. So that's the mindset of some of these big tech moguls. Now, having said that, I think that digital technologies and AI can certainly play a role in an ecological transition. We need, for example, smart electricity grids and so on. But it's a great but under the current economic framework, they will likely have more destructive consequences than benefits. Now, that means we have to change the framework. So what can we do about all of this? How to address the challenges of the crisis of life on Earth, of extreme inequality, and of the manipulation of public opinion. We have to address all of them at the same time. Now, the first thing I think we have to do is becoming able to make choices. And that means to demystify technology. It is not a quasi-autonomous subject. It is designed by people who have interest, and it can be changed. It's also about organizing democratic processes of public information on choices about technological developments. Now, what I want to propose is just some guidelines for such a discussion. You might have other guidelines. I propose 4 guidelines. One is saving the planet, which means drastically reducing our consumption of raw materials, energy, water, and land. This is a must. It's a do or die. If we don't do that, no civilization. The other is, second one, advancing social justice. That means reducing income and wealth gaps. Very simple proposition. Then enhancing human well-being and health. And fourth, enabling well-informed public debates on these issues, undistorted by power structures and vested interests. Now, the key question here is, which technologies, which property structures, and which decision-making processes could help to bring all this about? And I would like to highlight only 2 aspects of this. One is property and ownership, which is also the motto of this conference. Let's go back to the rotary printing press. When you introduce tools which can be used for mass propaganda, then it's not very wise to leave that control over such means in the hands of a tiny elite. We shouldn't do that. And the same is true for Silicon Valley today. So I think we finally need to break up big tech companies. We have to come up with concepts for public ownership of key digital infrastructures. The artistic director of the Ars Electronica, Gottfried Stalker, referred to this as digital socialism. And that also means transparent algorithms. And I think also lots of regulations like a ban on AI chatbots and things like that. We also have to think about changing the business models of tech companies. Digital tools should not be designed as addictive drugs as they are right now. I mean, the business model is to keep people hooked on Facebook or whatever to make more money. This shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't design addictive drugs digitally for profit seeking. Now, the second point I want to make is quantity. I talked about the limits to growth. We live on a limited planet. We have overshot its boundaries by far already. So we have to ask a very fundamental question. What do we really need in order to allow all humans and other species to live a decent life now and in the future? Now, this means we have to make choices. Where to employ raw materials, energy, work, creativity, and money. We cannot have everything at the same time. That's a very anthropocentric, egocentric, and childish idea. However, that's hard to accept for the hubris embedded in our culture and our economic system that depends on eternal growth. So the whole thing is about system change, of course. So in order to do that, to make these choices, we have to manage two things at the same time. One is the redistribution of wealth, and the other is the concept of sufficiency. How much do we need to have a decent life? So as for the social ecological transition in general, there are many proposals. I only cite the proposal for Global Green New Deal by Robert Pollin and Noam Chomsky, which costs about 5% of global GDP. It's sort of doable. It's financed by taxing the rich and by demilitarization. And for this kind of transition, of course, ownership again is key. Let's take the energy sector. If we have decentralized renewable energies owned by the public or by cooperatives, they can produce energy with renewables for the needs of the people. They don't have to grow. They don't have to sell more energy, which a capitalist enterprise should do. So they are very much able to fit into the concept of sufficiency. We need, of course, public transport instead of private cars and all of that. But we have to talk about something as well, which has sometimes been named digital sufficiency. The digital sphere is no exception from the limits to growth and from the idea of sufficiency. So we have to ask, what do we really need for the well-being of ourselves and the planet? And that means also some sort of restrictions to digitalization. We need a concept of basic digital services for all, prioritized by social and ecological criteria. So we have to ask, do we really need 4K movies on our smartphones and self-driving cars? I think they are utterly pointless in a way, and we should focus on what people really need. So to sum it up, AI can play a probably modest role in steering us into a livable future, but only under very different economic and political conditions, and that means we should engage in changing our fundamental institutions of this civilization. So thank you very much, and well, we have no Q&A session, but thank you for listening anyway.